Today's Locked On Bucks is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more as the playoffs have now wound down. Sports stop sporting like we want them to, but this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. Something for everyone every day all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Coming up on today's show, the Bucks make one of their offseason moves official. Oh, by the way, Giannis had a pretty big weekend as well, leading Greece to the Olympics in basketball for the first time in nearly 20 years. And is there a big move out there yet for the Bucks, literally and figuratively? We get into that conversation coming up after the break here on Locked On Bucks.
You are Locked On Bucks, your daily Milwaukee Bucks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into Locked On Bucks. I'm Justin Garcia, joined as always by Camille Davis, and we thank you for making Locked On Bucks your first listen every day. As always, free and available wherever you get your podcasts, and you can find us on YouTube as well as some of you are joining us now on the live stream of today's show. Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. A lot to get to here, Camille, on a show that kicks off a week that's typically where you get to the dead spots of the NBA calendar, at least in the area that's most interesting to a lot of fans, and that is the transactions piece. But we do have Summer League tipping off this week as well. We're still anticipating the Bucks to release their Summer League roster, which we would assume would come in the next couple of days here. We'll preview their entire Summer League slate, but especially that opener on Saturday, a little bit later in the week. But rounding out what we saw in the last couple of days here, we start with what happened in international play. And I think you and I were talking about this over the weekend as well. I didn't expect Greece to qualify for the Olympics. And I know a lot of the conversation we had coming into the offseason when you saw that Giannis was going to play was, I don't know how I feel about this. A lot of Bucks fans, too. He just missed the playoffs for a second consecutive year, essentially a second consecutive year, coming off a pretty sizable injury there when you think about it. I don't know if this is the right move. And I think part of your what you took solace in was, well, I don't know that Greece is poised for a deep run here. So maybe this is like 2 qualifying games we're talking about for Giannis. Then they obliterate Luka Doncic and Slovenia on Saturday in a game that shocked both of us of, wow, I did not expect Greece to win this game, let alone by the margin that they did. And you go into the final matchup with Croatia, a couple of NBA players on that team as well. And again, I kind of figured, well, Croatia's probably going to win this game. And it was a pretty comfortable win from start to finish for Team Greece. So they are headed to the Olympics basketball for Greece for the first time since 2008, I believe it was. And, regardless of how you feel about it, and I understand the trepidation and concerns and anxiousness that Bucks fans had watching Giannis return to the floor in international play, but seeing his reaction after the game, I'm not going to compare it to when the Bucks won the championship, but you could see how much that meant to Giannis to represent his country. And, oh, by the way, we get to see Giannis in the Olympics for the first time.
Yeah, the trepidation I think a lot of Bucks fans feel comes out of a love for the Bucks and for Giannis, where it's just like, I love Giannis so much. I love this team so much. I want him to be healthy and him to be able to play for us because I get joy out of that. I say I as this hypothetical person I'm speaking of who feels that trepidation. And I get that. Like you mentioned, I get it wholeheartedly because he is such a big part of this team. We saw this past playoff series where he's not healthy. The Bucks' chances are just not going to be the same without him. But on the flip side, to your point of seeing his reaction, for all the love that Bucks fans have for watching that man play in the Bucks uniform and represent Milwaukee, the way that he feels to be able to do that for his country of Greece, it's different. So for me, even I saw some people who were dead set against him playing overseas this year, who were dead set against him playing in the Olympics because they have injury concerns about Giannis. They don't want him to get hurt. And I get it. But even them, seeing the emotion that he had of just being able to say, we got to the Olympics, it even melted some of those hearts. Now, there are still some out there, I'm sure, who are like, I don't want to see this. But me personally, I think it's really cool that he's been able to achieve another one of his goals that he has set out to do, which is play for the Olympics. He has never played for the Olympics, which, given the fact that Greece hasn't been there since 2008, makes a lot of sense. He didn't even enter the league until 2013. So this is something that he has mentioned from the beginning as something that is very important to him, how much it would mean for him to medal for Greece and how much he wants that. So seeing them be able to take that first step to get there, it was really, really cool to see. It got my heartstrings pulled a little bit as well. And even seeing his kids out there with them, able to celebrate, taking that moment with them, it was beautiful to see. And then just seeing like the draw that they got as well. Like, we had some like, I don't know if Greece will make it, but to see them make it and be put into Group A with Australia, with Canada, and with Spain, it's like that's going to be a tough group to come out of. But I'm excited to see more Giannis playing basketball since we haven't been able to see it since April.
Yeah, excited to see him on the main stage, I suppose you would say, in the Olympics. And again, the reaction that you saw from Giannis after the game and how important that it was to him, I think maybe softened the stance for a handful of Bucks fans. If you were the, I don't want to play in the Olympics, what if something happens crowd, once you see that, it's hard not to say, okay, I'm not, it doesn't take away from how important the NBA and Bucks are to Giannis, but you can see how important this is to him. And I think the only disappointing thing from this for Giannis moving into the Olympics is we know Thanasis he's on the team, he's not going to play. And I don't believe either of his brothers are going to be available for the Olympics, as I think both those injuries are going to keep them out. So it does appear it's going to be just Giannis solo, but that is a very tough draw to have Australia, who have been perennially very, very impressive showers in the Olympics the last few years, in international play, in FIBA tournaments, handful of years. Team Canada as well, when you think about all the Canadian players in the NBA, and then Spain, as you mentioned. So I know it's on the goal sheet for Giannis to medal in the Olympics. Look, we said probably not going to happen in terms of reaching the Olympics, and look what happened. So I hesitate to say, yeah, they're not going to medal, but that's a pretty tough draw for Giannis to get. And I look, the other part of this is the first time in a handful of years that Giannis is the guy that is taking something on over the summer. It was always Drew Holiday and Chris Middleton went to the Olympics. Oh, by the way, your Damian Lillard trade last year that kind of hung everything up. So it's 2 straight years where you have your core pieces like a Brook Lopez, Chris Middleton, now Damian Lillard, who have a very, very lengthy offseason, a lot of time to recuperate and work on some things. I saw people point out of, man, look what Giannis is doing. It looks like he's all the way back in the in the qualifiers here. And some of the videos and shots that we've seen of Damian Lillard and his offseason progress and some of the workouts that he's been under. And you think, okay, I'm starting to feel pretty good about the layoff and the time that these guys have had for themselves to work on some things and get better, especially for an aging veteran group. And then for Giannis to start to knock off some of that rust and get back out there on the floor.
Yeah, because it's like I say, every summer guys are going to be playing basketball as it is. This for Giannis is going to be, of course, a really competitive environment that he is stepping into, but he has a great coaching staff over there in Greece. I saw that they made those changes for the national team going into this year and whatnot. So I've seen a lot of Greece fans very, very happy about the coaching changes and how the team is being ran a bit differently, just the coaching sets and how Giannis is being used. And on top of that, we have seen Bucks coaches make that trip over there as well, just to kind of be with Giannis and just keep an eye on his progress as well. So I think it's good for him as well. I think of the year that Bobby Portis was part of USA Basketball, and he came back I feel like I'm in great shape because I got a chance to play at a really, really high level over the summer in some runs that I wouldn't have got the chance to play in otherwise, given the fact of the competition level for these games. So given the fact that Giannis, as we mentioned, has not played since April 9th, it was when that Celtics game took place where he injured his calf. And now we get to see him on one of the biggest stages in the world playing basketball again. Like, there is some joy that I get out of that, of being like, hey, that guy who represents Milwaukee, most of the year, now it's like a home for him. He gets a chance to play on the largest stage in the world. I'm here for that. I'm excited for it. And I think it's going to be good for him, especially getting that rust off and just getting back into that playing shape since it's been a little bit of a layoff for him. And there were people who were like, how can he play in this? But he couldn't play in the playoffs. And it's been like 3 months. Like, that's how he can play in one and not the other. So overall, I'm just really happy to see him playing basketball because I love watching Giannis hoop. That's what I kept thinking about during the playoffs. Just like, man, I really wish we could have saw Giannis in the playoffs, or man, I really wish I could watch the Bucks right now. Yeah. And now at least I get to see some Giannis in addition to other, NBA superstars playing in the Olympics. But at least we got somebody who represents the Bucks out there as well.
And not to dredge up the past here, but even Giannis himself indicated it. Doc Rivers basically said it as well in some later interviews of he was never going to play in round one. And he was probably going to miss, if the Bucks had won, at least half of that second round series. So when you hear how can he play in this already? To your point, it had been 3 months since initially suffering the injury. And yeah, it was always going to be pretty deep into the playoffs. And I think as you picked up on more things that Doc Rivers and others said, there was never anything concrete that kind of led you to believe, oh, there's going to be some time. Like I would anticipate we're not going to have him for this series and potentially the next year. The Bucks did make one of their, I should say, their off-season move official, as the others have not been made official, other than them touting out the draft picks. But the signing of DeLon Wright has been made official. So Camille and I, we already kind of gave some high-level insights on that, but we'll take an extended look at that. What's his role going to be with the team and what to expect from DeLon Wright coming up next season? And also, is there another big move out there for the Bucks? So I mentioned one of those stories from James Edwards of The Athletic linking Brook Lopez to the Pistons. Is there something else that makes sense? Is there anything to take from that? We'll get into those conversations coming up after the break here on Locked On Bucks. Well, I love sports so much that I never want them to stop. But as the playoffs have now wound down, we're getting fewer games, and the sports just aren't sporting like I want them to. But FanDuel lets you keep the sports going whenever you want. All you have to do is open up the app and dream up bets anytime you're in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. Something for everyone every day all summer long. Head to FanDuel.com to start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. Well, Camille, the DeLon Wright signing is now official as the Bucks sent out the word Sunday night is when I got the press release from Eric Kolbeck and the rest of the Bucks media relations staff there. So no reason to believe it was not going to happen, but it's now official, and we can officially dig into and talk about, hey, DeLon Wright is going to be a member of this team next season. We talked a little bit about what to expect from him, what type of player that he is, the value in this signing, as I think it was received pretty highly across league circles and, by NBA insiders, quote unquote, of, hey, it's pretty good value for the Bucks to get here. And I think, look, he's a veteran-ish player. He's 32 years old, but there's still clearly gas in that tank, and his versatility is a big piece. And again, we've talked the last year or so about the shift in philosophy with some of those draft picks, and you saw an even steeper shift this past summer a couple of weeks ago. But signings like DeLon Wright, and one that's not official yet, but in Taurean Prince, to me kind of indicate another one of those shifts in how the Bucks are approaching the free agency market.
Yeah, they are looking to patch some holes that they saw last year. We mentioned just bringing in two-way guys, just trying to get a little bit more defense on this team that can play some rotational minutes would be good for him. And I agree with that train of thought. So looking at DeLon Wright and what he brings to the team, like you mentioned, he's a combo guard, primarily seen as like a backup point guard, but not somebody as a backup point guard that you look to and like, hey, he's like a floor general type of point guard. That's why, combo guard. He can, move the ball a bit. He can shoot a bit. He can, defend pretty well. Like that's where he really hangs his hat. So I think that's going to be something that this lineup needs a lot. And I've been thinking a bit just about how this team is constructed and what that might mean for like starting lineups. Because when me and you saw the initial word of DeLon Wright getting ready to sign with the Bucks, we were like, oh, that's a good pickup. That's a great value pickup. Someone who can play good rotational minutes. But he hasn't been a starter in his career for the most part. He's been a spot starter, over the years, but not truly a starter. And I've been thinking about that, like, who is the Bucks starting shooting guard at this moment? Is that something that's going to be decided in camp? Like, is it really an open spot right now? Was Wright coming here in part to take that minimum because it's like, I'm going to get a lot of playing time because I know the Bucks have this gap at, shooting guard or just a guard, need for a guard. So I've been thinking about his usage and if it would make sense for Wright to start. Because when I'm thinking about the lineup, it made me think back to the old Tony Snell days where you're like, listen, that fifth starter, he doesn't necessarily need to be all this. He just needs to fit a role. And we've talked about the best type of guard that's next to Damian Lillard. And that tends to be a more defensive guy, somebody who can pick up that hardest offensive assignment night in and night out. So like, just to throw it to you, do you think that there is a chance that we do see DeLon Wright as the starting shooting guard for this team? Or do you think it might end up being a AJ Green, Andre Jackson Jr.? Does Chris Middleton move to the 2? They start Prince once that signing is official? Or like, how do you think they might just do this lineup here with the talent that they have on the team?
So, obviously you never say never.
Right.
My preference would be no, that he would be more of a combo guard that comes off the bench and maybe is your sixth man. In terms of who's your starting 2 guard, that's where it gets kind of complicated. I think to me, the moves that would make the most sense, the most logical options that the Bucks have on their present roster, to me, you just named. Either starting Andre Jackson Jr. at the 2 guard, and he is your defensive component next to Damian Lillard. And, again, just as the conversation we had last offseason when you acquired Dame was who's the 5th starter, and doesn't matter. You got more than enough offense from Giannis, Damian Lillard, Chris Middleton, and Brook Lopez. So do you just need a defensive guy? And we saw the Bucks go the opposite direction. I think it screams that of, okay, this is a good opportunity, provided he can win the job, for Andre Jackson Jr. to become the starting 2 guard. And that's his role, is he's the defender in the backcourt with Damian Lillard. The other one that I was thinking through, and I know our guy Ty over that the Eurostep podcast, I think they talked about this the other day, was Taurean Prince. Do you start Taurean Prince? And doing so would obviously mean that Chris Middleton shifts to 2 guard, a spot that we've seen him play in the past. My only hesitation with that is, at this point in his career, is Chris Middleton better served playing the 3? And I know there's not all that much of a difference in terms of your matchups out there on the perimeter defensively, but there's still some difference. And, the biggest piece that you touched on is the partnership and the tandem that it creates with Damian Lillard and what you'd be expected to take on defensively there. So, while on paper it makes sense, and I think you could talk yourself into, if you don't listen to Lakers fans at least, you could talk yourself into Taurean Prince as a starter probably more than DeLon Wright. I just don't know if that's the move that makes sense for the Bucks to do, given what you'd be asking of Chris Middleton.
Yeah, that's the piece of it for me. When any conversation comes around Chris possibly starting at 2, where I'm like, I just think that those years are behind him at this point, just given that as he's gotten older, the lateral quickness has, left a bit for him. And that's what happens when you get older. That's part of it. He has the injuries as well. He does not move as well as he used to, but I still don't think of Chris Middleton as a negative defender, but he's just not somebody who you want to throw out and say, like, you guard the toughest guy on the other team. He's a great team defender in the system because he has the intelligence and IQ as well to make the right move. So I'm with you on that. I don't love the idea of Chris Middleton being the starting 2 guard with Prince next to him at the 3, even though they would probably just tell Prince to try to guard the 2 instead of, or whoever that assignment is, instead of Chris, but it just doesn't seem to fit quite as well. So that training camp battle is one that's going to be really interesting. I mean, we had the conversation last season as well, like, who is that starting shooting guard? And this year, the options they're wildly different, because if you are going with an AJ Green, so to speak, like, that defensive part isn't necessarily there of, yeah, you take that toughest assignment, but the shooting there that we got from Beasley last year with being able to stretch out the floor, so on and so forth, is there with AJ Green. And then as we mentioned, DeLon Wright just hasn't necessarily been a starter throughout his career so far. So might just be better served as that 6-man off the bench. Prince, more of a 3. And then 2 with the minutes, as you mentioned, how Lakers fans were like, hey, you might not want to go down that road. I think we keep his minutes around that 20-ish mark. That's perfect for Prince. And if he's starting, I feel like that number is going to be a bit larger. So it's something I'm looking forward to seeing how it plays out. But just to take it back to the initial point of DeLon Wright coming to the Bucks, I think that's a great pickup. I really do. I think that's going to be one of those pickups where it doesn't make a big splash, but it makes an impact on the rotation.
Yeah, and when you look at the options that were out there, and we went deep into it in our episode with Frank a couple of weeks ago, looking at what are the realistic options for the Bucks, realistic targets for them in free agency here. I think as you look through it, we all kind of hovered towards Chris Dunn. He is a better defender than DeLon Wright, is able to give you more defensively and do some more things there. But I think DeLon Wright is a more rounded player. He's certainly a better offensive player. Not to say that DeLon Wright's going to be, averaging 15 or more points a game, but he's a better shooter. He can give you some more there. He only had 1 year throughout his career where he shot less than 30% on threes. That was the outlier year. Other than that, he's been pretty consistently in the mid 30% as a 3-point shooter. So you may not be getting as much. And again, it's not to take away from DeLon Wright's defense, but I think that was the big appeal for a lot of us with Chris Dunn, is what we just talked about. Okay, you could start him. You put him in the backcourt next to Damian Lillard, and he's taking on all of those tough matchups. He's able to take on some of what you're not getting with Damian Lillard. So I think the value piece is the big one here in that, Taurean Prince and DeLon Wright, for where this team was a season ago when we were saying, man, you just need anything out there. Those are 2 pretty decent value acquisitions for the veterans minimum. And, the other things to point out and moves that were made official were, I mentioned both the draft picks. They have signed. Tyler Smith signed for the rookie minimum. And AJ Johnson actually took less than that rookie scale to save the Bucks. I think it was like $150,000 in that slot, which it may not seem like a lot, but for a team that, as we've kind of outlined, okay, it's going to take X, Y, and Z, but they still can get under that second apron. Moves like that are as important as any to start to pick up some of that leeway and say, okay, here's this. Now we just got to do this, and we got to trim off this amount versus this.
Yep, every dollar matters. Every dollar matters. Like, they were clowning LeBron for taking a couple of million less, where it's like, but that gives the Lakers a lot of flexibility. Now, taking $150,000 less isn't the same as taking millions less, given where the Bucks are, but it's not as if the contract is the same. So to your point, listen, that was really smart for the Bucks and for AJ to try to get done. And them doing so gives them just a little bit of more wiggle room to try to make something happen if they are looking to get underneath that second apron before the end of the next league year, or if that's a setup to another move that they're looking to do this offseason before the season even starts. So it's a little bit, but every little bit helps with where the Bucks are right now with their salary cap.
So there is one other, I don't even want to say move out there, but is there another move out there? I know this kind of got lost in the shuffle of Giannis leading Greece to the Olympics, signings being made official, everybody starting to look ahead towards Summer League and everything else as we had the moratorium lifted, but now you get to that dip in free agency. And this one kind of slid under the radar from James Edwards of The Athletic, who covers the Pistons, and noted, look, Detroit still needs to hit that 90% threshold of the salary floor, which I believe means they would need to add, I think we said it was about $12 million, at least somewhere around there, to get to that figure. So are the Pistons going to be looking to make a move? As remember, the change in the CBA is you have to be at that figure by the start of the season. It's not like it was in the past where, hey, if you don't get to that number, you don't get to the floor, whatever number it is, you're under the floor, you just disperse that out, split it up amongst your players, and they get a bonus. No, you got to hit 90% of the floor when the season starts. So that means the Pistons are not done, whether it be through a trade or throwing money at somebody that's out there on the free agent market yet just for a year. They have to do something. And James Edwards kicked around one option that involves the Bucks. So Camille and I will get into that conversation coming up after this on Locked On Bucks. Well, this episode of Locked On Bucks is brought to you by BetterHelp. And look, sometimes we all have things we need to get off our chests. It can be that anxious time of year. We just passed one holiday. I know those affect everybody a little bit differently, and sometimes you just need somebody to talk to share some of those experiences with, and let some things off your chest. That's where BetterHelp comes in for the ultimate assist. Whether you've benefited from therapy or not, you're a little unsure on how to use it. If you need it, in fact, BetterHelp is the place for you to get started. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It is entirely online. It's designed to be convenient, flexible, and most importantly, it is suited around your schedule. All you have to do to get started is fill out a brief questionnaire. From there, you'll get matched with a licensed therapist, and you can even switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Stop comparing and start focusing with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA, and you'll get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA. All right, Camille, I mentioned that story from over the weekend coming from James Edwards of The Athletic, who covers the Pistons. They, of course, made the move signing Tobias Harris, and I think people kind of laughed at it and said, well, who are you competing against for Tobias Harris? And look, the reality is no one. And I think if there is anything to push back on, the perceived reality is no one. If there's anything to push back on, I suppose it would be, well, maybe you could have given him a Jabari Parker type of deal where that second year is non-guaranteed or has a partial guarantee to save yourself some money there. But it's also pretty clear parts of that, even if we didn't really see any other suitors for Tobias Harris, was, hey, we need to spend some money here. So right now on July 8th, the Pistons salary is $114.2 million. The salary cap for this year is $140.5 million. So, I mean, you do the math there. The Pistons are more than $26 million under that figure. I mentioned the 90% that you have to get to. That means the Pistons have to get to at least $126.5 million. So $12.3 million that you need to add between now and the start of the season. 26.3 is their cap room where they would avoid being taxed. Brook Lopez earns $23 million. So James Edwards of The Athletic pointed this out. I believe it was Friday that the story came out of, hey, Pistons are probably not done yet. They still need to add some salary to start to bump up towards that salary floor. Here's some moves that I think would make sense for both teams, knowing that the Pistons have to add some money. We're not going to bore you with the other ones. We'll just focus on the last one he suggested, which involves the Bucks, and that was the Bucks sending I believe a 2031, because that's their next second-round pick, a 2031 second-round pick and the contract of Brook Lopez to the Pistons for Jalen Duren. So we'll get your reaction in a second to that, Camille, but Jalen Duren, Obviously a big man. If you haven't seen much of him, I'm assuming Bucks fans have at least seen the 5 or 6 games he's played against the Bucks in the last couple of years here. He is not even 21 years old. So I think part of this is also, would the Pistons actually do this? I know they have to add money, but this is still a very young guy who I think showed some really bright flashes throughout the last 2 seasons here. Is that worth the second round draft pick? So look, before you chime in with that, that's the deal on Jalen Duren. That's his age. He's also earning $4.5 million. So if you are the Bucks and you make that trade, it costs you yet another second round pick where you would not have any until 2032. And also, if things go haywire, your 2031 draft pick could get frozen if you don't get out of that second apron. But you would be trimming about $19 million off of your salary line there, which would bring you below the tax.
Mm-hmm. So I double checked. It's actually a first round pick in his proposed trade. So okay. I do wonder, when we come back, I wonder if that changes your mathematics on the situation a bit, if it's a first instead of a second. But for me, the first question is, what are you trying to accomplish as the Bucks? So what is the goal here? Is the goal for the Bucks this season to get underneath that second apron? Is the goal to compete? Like, what is the biggest goal that there is? Is if championship is that one? Does Jalen Duren help you get there more so than Brook Lopez does? And at this stage in his career, I love the potential of him for sure. Because as you mentioned, he's really young. He was a double-double last year, if I remember correctly. He averaged a double-double last year with rebounds and points. And you can see, like, there's real potential here. A big man who can have some defense and go from there. The shooting isn't there that you would get from Brook Lopez. But, I mean, one could argue, hey, Brook didn't have that shooting when he entered the league either. It was something that he had to learn over time. But if the goal is like, hey, we're going to try to compete for sure, but we need to get underneath that second apron, this is a move that you could do. To me, I don't necessarily think it makes you better in the short term. And trying to match windows together is a really difficult process where you're like, we're in a championship window. We're trying to compete right now. We have Dame, we have Giannis, we have Chris. And we understand, like, this could be the last year that we see them try to see if this trio can work before, if another first round exit happens, does this all get blown up? And it's like, we need to go in a different direction again. So it's like, does Brook Lopez give you a better chance to get into a championship, or does Jalen Duren give you a better chance? I think the answer to that right now is still Brook Lopez. But if the goal is we want to be competitive, we think that Giannis and Chris and Dame alone is enough to propel. If we get a young defensive center who can be a little bit more versatile, we'll work with that. We can figure out the rest going from there. If that's how they would feel about it, and that's a big goal of the Bucks, we have to get under that second apron, then that's a move for sure to explore. But personally, I think for this year, where it's like, I don't think it makes the Bucks better to try to win a championship. So in the short run, it's like, I don't know about it. If it was a move that was made, it would signify to me like, we got to get under the second cap or second apron. And then from there, we have to figure out how to maximize the talent on this team.
Well, and so it clearly would not and could not be the only move that you make. So I mentioned it would take you below the cap. So it's not even getting out of the second apron and you'd have your taxpayer mid-level. You would have the full mid-level to use. The only thing is, okay, who's out there, right? Who could you still bring in? As they would still have that one open roster spot. We had talked about before, leaning towards the open roster spot to use it on a big, just to give you some more insurance, and maybe it can buy you some more rest for Brook Lopez. If you did this deal, and again, it's just being thrown out there, there's no sourcing behind this. James Edwards himself even said, these are just things I looked at, team needs and the amount the Pistons need to take on, yada, yada, yada. If you did this deal, it would kind of signal, we're changing the way we play, and we've heard a lot of those murmurs and rumblings of the Bucks want to be more versatile defensively. And to me, this would signal, okay, we have Jalen Duren to eat up some regular season minutes and to see how he fares in the postseason. But this is the shift towards how we're going to close the game. Giannis is the big. And look, coming off what we saw in the Olympic qualifiers, Giannis played as a traditional big in those games. That was one of the changes that we saw to his usage. And we talked about this the other day of, I don't want to take too much from that because the FIBA game is different from the NBA game, but it's worth noting of, okay, that's watching Giannis as a true traditional big. Not to say you don't want to put the ball in his hands and take that out of the mix, but all right, this works how some of us envisioned, and especially with a guard pair like Damian Lillard back there. But when you look at who else is out there, look, if you could have made this deal a week ago and it opens up the full mid-level where you could get a guy like Caleb Martin, yeah, it makes a ton of sense that you get that. You already had Taurean Prince, and you're adding more guys that can eat up some minutes at the 3 and 4, playing next to Giannis as your closing 5. But the guys that are left out there, because to me, you only do a move like that, to your point, you don't do it just to save money, right? Like
Exactly.
You can look into ways to do that throughout the course of the season and in the off season. When you have this group that's still poised to win a championship or compete for a championship, you don't make moves to save money. It can save you money, but there has to be, what's the next shoe to drop? What is the secondary move to come from this? So that's where examining who's out there yet on the free agent market that you feel like could be impactful for you. And there's no restrictions if you have that mid-level exception to use. The best names left out there are mostly on the wing. Saddiq Bey is out there, tore his ACL, so he's probably going to miss most of this season, which is kind of surprising. That I wondered if a team would just sign him to the veterans minimum, just so you can give him the raise next season, rehab him on your dime, and to have him ready to go. Maybe you get him back in March or something too for the playoffs. Kyle Lowry is out there. We've talked about a team that's looking to get younger and more athletic. Kyle Lowry does not fit that bill for you, even if, maybe you could use a backup point guard, especially if you plan on signing DeLon Wright. Markelle Fultz is out there. There's a lot of intrigue with a lot of parts of Markelle Fultz's game, but the shooting is what makes it difficult to digest. The interesting names to me, and Lonnie Walker is out there. We've talked about him as a guy that I would assume at this point probably going to be on the vet minimum. But a handful of the interesting names that are out there start with Haywood Highsmith, who what's going to happen there in Miami, that I think it seemed as though the 76ers were interested in him potentially at one point. Then, we can get your teammate Caleb Martin. We'll just do that. But he's a young guy. He's had some intriguing moments, especially against the Bucks. My hesitation with Haywood Highsmith, and even to a lesser extent Caleb Martin, is any of those Heat guys. It was like the Spurs in the past when you get them out of that system and like, wait a minute, this isn't what we signed up for. So that's the one thing to keep an eye on. Gary Trent Jr., we've heard some scuttlebutt about that and whether or not he would be willing to take the vet minimum because of his relationship with Damian Lillard. Well, if you can offer more than the vet minimum, you feel pretty good about your chances of landing him. Isaac Okoro out there as well, who was a top 5 pick in the draft. And this was a guy that even last year you could see still defensively what he brings. The trick is the offense. So finding out what are the best lineups to play him in, but you can stick him in the corner. He can take on some big wings defensively. And then to a lesser extent too, we talk about, hey, you still need or would love a backup point guard depending on how you're going to use DeLon Wright. It's not really going to help you defensively, but Tyus Jones is out there. So there's really 2 names to me of that group that would make the most sense for the Bucks to really lean into. Those being Isaac Okoro and Gary Trent Jr. It does not address the big, as I see somebody mention, what about Paul Reed? That would open that up for you as well. Not to say that he would not take the vet minimum. I'm curious to see what the market is for Paul Reed. But again, you could offer a decent amount of playing time and more than the veterans minimum. So we'll lump in Paul Reed as well. Those are the 3 names I think that would make the most sense if you opened up that money through this, again, just thrown out there trade with no sourcing. I just don't know if one of those three guys and Jalen Duren and the cap savings that you get, the tax savings that you get, is anything that's going to be worth it and something that you think would keep you at that level you were with Brook Lopez.
It's difficult without having the other big. So if it was B-ball Paul, where you're getting Paul Reed, and then you have Jalen Duren, and then you have Giannis, and possibly keep Bobby there as well, and then you have Tyler Smith as that rookie who's learning, then that's like your rotation of bigs. And it's like, how much comfort do you have within that? So maybe I'm perfectly fine with rolling that out there as long as we can have some more offense on the team, as well as defense on the wings. And with that, if Isaac Okoro was able to find a way to Milwaukee, I know the shooting hasn't been there for him, and that's been his biggest knock since he came into the league. The point of attack defense has always been there for Okoro, and that's like his elite NBA skill at the moment. But last season, he shot 39% from three. Granted, a lower volume, but it was the first time in his development that we've seen so far where you're seeing him starting to knock down that shot with some level of consistency that he has not had yet throughout his NBA career. And if he can continue to build on that, he becomes a really, really valuable player because of his defense, because of his size. I believe he's 6'5", 6'6", somewhere in that range there as well. So Okoro for me would be like top of the list if this hypothetical trade took place. And you're going younger in that way of getting another wing defender as well. And I think part of it too is just every year after a championship, you kind of look at what that championship team did and you're like, how can we do a little bit more of that? And getting the wing defenders is one thing that you saw with Boston that worked for them. We see Brooklyn doing the same, or not Brooklyn, the Knicks doing the same thing, going all in on trying to just get these versatile wing defenders as well. So adding another one to the mix for Milwaukee, if it's Okoro, would be great. The only thing with that is I feel like if you did get Okoro on that move, then I think one of the other young guys might be moved because at this point, then there's a log jam at the position.
Well, and to circle back as we start to wrap here, look, in fairness, one of the names we did not point out and suggest of who could start at the 2 or who would start at the 2 with the roster as it currently is MarJon Beauchamp, who I think we excluded and shouldn't have, but that's another one to keep an eye on. But yes, the other part of it is this deal, not only would it open those avenues up for you to have a full mid-level, it also means, the whole you can't aggregate salaries. That's out the window. When you look at, is there a contract we're looking to get rid of? We don't have draft picks to attach, but we could attach this. You could then do that with, any one of those young players and any other contract. If I think anybody can read between the lines who we're alluding to that you needed to attach to get out from that, you could do that. And that, again, would open up another roster spot for you to use something on and say, okay, we'll bring in a big and we'll bring in one of those guys that we mentioned. Maybe you could get Paul Reed and you could get Gary Trent Jr., or you could get or you could get Isaac Okoro and Paul Reed if you did that and still be at 14 on your roster. So that to me is the most intriguing parts of that proposed deal is not so much the, like for like in Jalen Duren for Brook Lopez. He's not the rim protector that Brook Lopez is. He's very athletic. He had some bright flashes. I especially remember one game against the Bucks, but I don't know that he's a starting center on a team that wins a championship or competes for one, but it's just the secondary moves and everything else that this would open up if you have a clear plan and a pretty good idea of if we do this and we clear up these things, not tampering, but we know that we can do X, Y, and Z. Yeah. If those plans are in place, then it makes sense to me. But if this is just hey, we save money and then let's figure out what we're going to do with it, that's when those are the types of moves that typically put you in trouble.
Yeah, I would agree with that. In a vacuum, like I said, the move alone does not make the Bucks better. So that's why I was like, I don't know if you do that alone. But to your point, if you can add the secondary moves after that and then get the roster reconstructed in that way, then like I can buy into that new vision of that team and just see how it plays out. It'll be widely different than what we've gotten used to over the last few years. And even thinking of Giannis with Greece, Papa Giannis, the center next to him, he learned how to shoot. Like he's been putting up those threes and helping.
You're heading down dangerous territory as we already saw quite a bit of. Hey, get rid of Brook Lopez, bring in Papa Giannis as the big man.
No, let me be very clear. We're not saying that here. Just the type of big that is, sharing the front court with Giannis. It's another guy who can stretch the floor. So there's still value in, I think, having that guy next to Giannis. And if it was Darren, you lose that a bit. But that is not to say that is the only way to play basketball. It's just the way that we've gotten used to watching the Bucks utilize Giannis.
Yeah, so that's going to be interesting because Detroit has to do something. So we'll see what it is that that they end up doing. And now we just kind of shift our attention towards Summer League. So I would imagine the roster is going to come out in a day or so here, since the Bucks first Summer League game is Saturday. So we're going to learn relatively soon who is on that Summer League roster. I think it's safe to assume AJ Johnson and Tyler Smith are going to be on there. Ryan Rollins and Jalen Galloway are both under two-way deals, so not hard to imagine that they would be a part of that group. Vin Baker Jr. as well was on their Summer League squad season ago. At this point, I don't think you're going to see Marshawn, Andre Jackson, or AJ Green on there, or Chris Livingston either, if you're saying indicating that he's ready to contribute, or we think he will be this season. But still, there's a lot of intriguing young pieces that we're going to see. And you always have those, as we mentioned, Vin Baker Jr. a season ago, you always have those names that's brought up too. Jabari Parker, we thought was going to be on the Summer League roster a season ago. So there's always that piece of nostalgia or intrigue of, oh, okay, this guy. So yeah, we will learn that obviously before Saturday, but sometime in the coming days here, who the Bucks are going to roll out there for Summer League, which starts on Saturday. We will be back once again tomorrow, see if there's any movement on that, what the Pistons do to add some salary. Maybe we'll know what the Summer League roster is, and maybe some other moves will be made official as well. So we'll wrap it up there. For Camille, I'm Justin. We'll talk to you once again tomorrow on Locked On Bucks.